For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. You know, it's really one of the most famous high-stakes warnings in all of human literature. It's a simple rule, but it carries the ultimate penalty. So, what actually happens when that singular boundary is crossed?
Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here. Today, we're going straight to the source. We're looking directly at the original King James Version text of Genesis to uncover the narrative arc of humanity's foundational myth. The story of Adam and Eve is, well, it's widely known, obviously. But when you actually look closely at the structure and the highly specific language used in the text, it reveals this fascinating rapid progression from absolute paradise right into ultimate tragedy.
Section 1. The Creation of Humanity, the Beginning.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We are looking at the exact blueprint of humanity according to the second chapter of Genesis. And notice, it wasn't just a spoken command from afar. It was this incredibly intimate two-step process. First, God literally forms man out of the dust of the ground. Then, he breathes the breath of life directly into his nostrils, and man becomes a living soul. What's absolutely vital to remember here is that humanity is given a completely unique status. They're created in the very image of God and given dominion over the earth.
Section 2. The Garden and the Rule. Eden's Boundaries.
Now, the text doesn't treat Eden like some abstract, hazy idea. It treats it as a real geographic location. It's planted eastward, and it is absolutely bursting with every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. It's watered by this massive river that actually parts into 4 distinct heads. The source even specifically names them for us: Pishon, Gihon, Hiddekel, and Euphrates. This gives the mythological paradise a real grounding in recognizable geography. It is, by all accounts, an environment of total provision.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the stark contrast between the ultimate provision of life and the one singular boundary established by God. Right there in the midst of the garden are 2 specific trees. On one side, we have the tree of life, and on the other, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Man is told, hey, you may freely eat of every single tree in the entire garden except one. The tree of knowledge is the only forbidden tree, and the stated penalty for eating from it is absolute. It's death.
But before that rule is tested, we get to see the completion of humanity. Finding that it's just not good for man to be alone, God casts a deep sleep on Adam and creates a partner from his rib. When she's brought to him, Adam makes this beautiful, highly poetic declaration: "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." He names her woman, a title that really reflects their total, unashamed unity. They are perfectly unified with each other and perfectly aligned with their Creator.
Section 3. The Serpent's Deception. The First Temptation.
Enter the serpent. He's described in the text as more subtle or cunning than any beast of the field. And notice his tactic here. He doesn't just launch a frontal attack. He starts with a simple question. Yea, hath God said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? He essentially distorts God's generous rule, the one that allowed them to eat of almost every tree, into a restrictive question. He's planting the very first seed of doubt in Eve's mind about God's actual intentions.
Now Eve corrects the serpent at first, stating they can eat the fruit, just not the one in the midst of the garden, lest they die. But the absolutely crucial point happens right here. The serpent drops the subtle questions and goes for a direct, blatant contradiction of God's one rule. He just says, ye shall not surely die. He follows this right up by promising that eating the fruit will actually open their eyes, making them as gods, knowing good and evil. He completely flips the script, framing disobedience not as death, but as enlightenment.
And while the temptation works perfectly, the text tells us Eve saw the tree was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. So she takes it, she eats, she gives it to Adam, who is right there beside her, and he eats too. And almost instantly, the promise is twistedly fulfilled. Their eyes are indeed opened, but definitely not to glorious enlightenment. Instead, they experience the sudden, jarring awareness of their own vulnerability. They realize they're naked, and in a desperate panic to just cover their shame, they sew fig leaves together. Just like that, the total innocence of Eden is gone in a single bite.
Section 4. The Fall and the Curses. Consequences.
So the Creator returns to the garden, walking in the cool of the day. Hearing the voice of the Lord, Adam and Eve do something they've literally never done before. They hide among the trees in sheer terror. And then God calls out to Adam with a rapid-fire question that really just echoes through the ages. Where art thou?
Adam replies from the bushes, admitting he was afraid because he was naked. And immediately God follows up with this masterful second interrogation question: Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree? Before a formal confession is even made, the very fact that they understand their nakedness fully exposes their overwhelming guilt.
So when they're confronted, absolutely no one takes accountability. It is literally the oldest game of pass the buck in human history. The passing of blame is instantaneous. Adam points the finger at Eve, and he actually subtly blames God in the process, saying, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree." Eve, in turn, points her finger at the serpent, saying, "The serpent beguiled me."
But the rule was broken, so consequences have to be enforced. The Genesis text lays out a highly structured sequence of judgments that fundamentally alter the human experience forever. First, the serpent is cursed to crawl on its belly and face eternal enmity with the woman's offspring. Second, the woman faces greatly multiplied sorrow in childbirth and a serious disruption in her relationship with her husband. Third, the man is told the ground itself is cursed. So, instead of the effortless abundance of Eden, it's going to bring forth thorns, and he's going to have to work for his bread by the sweat of his brow. And then comes the ultimate consequence. It's the somber fulfillment of that very first warning. Because they were taken from the ground, the text states, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." Human mortality is officially introduced into the world. The penalty for crossing that boundary is, exactly as promised, death.
Section 5. Exile and Legacy. Life after Eden.
Now, right before they are cast out, there is this profound moment where God replaces their flimsy fig leaves by making them coats of skins. It's a visual of provision, sure, but it's also the first shedding of blood to cover shame. Then comes the tragic banishment. To prevent them from eating from the tree of life and living forever in their fallen state, God drives them completely out of Eden. And in a highly vivid, absolutely unforgettable image, he places cherubim and a flaming sword turning every direction to forever guard the way back. The door to paradise is permanently closed. Outside the garden, Adam and Eve begin their family. And almost immediately, we see the corruption from the fall manifest in the very next generation. Just look at the divergent paths of their sons, Cain and Abel. Abel is a shepherd, and he brings the best of his flock as an offering, which the Lord respects. Cain, a farmer, brings the fruit of the ground, which the Lord does not respect. And this rejection, it makes Cain intensely furious. That jealousy just boils over. Cain rises up in the field and commits the very first murder, killing his brother Abel. When God asks Cain where his brother is, Cain delivers this chilling, arrogant response. "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" Look at how incredibly fast the sin from the garden has escalated here. They went from taking a piece of fruit to taking a human life. Looking at the chronological momentum, we can clearly see how quickly this whole tragedy builds. It starts with immense beauty and potential, man created in God's exact image. Then comes the test, where the singular rule is broken. Next, we have the harsh reality of the consequence, where curses are handed down and the exile is enforced. And finally, that terrible legacy is passed right to the next generation, culminating in brother turning against brother. Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. Does the tragedy of Eden still shape how we understand human nature, temptation, and consequence today? Because whether you view it as literal history or profound literary myth, the Genesis account maps out the architecture of human failing and the loss of innocence in a way that is just utterly timeless. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating source material today. Keep seeking, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.